No intro music today?
It's going.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
Jewels.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It's Tuesday. Welcome back to Law and Legitimacy. Mike and I took a day off yesterday, in part court beckoned, but in part these never-ending tech issues beckoned. I'm almost at a point where I've got my Rodecaster hooked up to my PC and actually working. But of course, I forgot to charge the PC last night. So I'm talking to you through the
tin can
box. The Rodecaster through the Mac. So I'm talking to you today through the boom box of the PC, and I'm aware of those critics who say it sounds awful. So we're working on it. You know, we're hoping to become the first-class production some of you think we can be, and we hope to be it some days. I will resume jury selection in New Haven today. It'll be, I think, the 6th day of jury selection in a murder case. Hopefully we'll wrap it up today and put on evidence one of these days. Not all of it good, but that's what makes it newsworthy. Michael Cohen's testified, and according to at least one press account, did a pretty good job. He was not angry. He was not defiant. He sort of laid it out. And the case he laid out is that Trump thought that the story regarding Stormy Daniels needed to be buried, that he authorized Cohen to pay to catch, for the capture of the story, and that he authorized repayment of Cohen by way of periodic payments that would be characterized as legal fees. I've seen some commentators say that they're not sure that amounts to proof beyond a reasonable doubt of a fraudulent entry on a business record. It looks like it does to me. I mean, I think the case will go to a jury. In other words, I don't think the court will grant what's called a motion for a judgment of acquittal. What am I talking about? In criminal trials, the state chooses its charges. It either proceeds by way of an information or a grand jury indictment, depending on the state. And once the case is on, and once jeopardy is attached, that is, once the first juror has been sworn, or once the jury rather has been sworn to hear the case, it's up to the state to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. If at any point the state fails to prove its case, in other words, fails to provide sufficient evidence for a jury to conclude that the defendant, reasonably to conclude that the defendant broke the law, the court can enter what's called the judgment of acquittal. And that judgment of acquittal will end the case. It's also possible, if a person is convicted, for the defense team to take an appeal and to claim on appeal that the evidence was insufficient to support a conviction. A sufficiency of the evidence claim will end the case conclusively by way of showing that the case should never have gone to a jury in the first instance. Normally, in a criminal case, when a defendant wins, the case is remanded for trial. Again, if there's an evidentiary error, the judge let in the bloody glove or something and shouldn't have, then the case gets remanded with direction to follow the orders of the court. But on a sufficiency claim, the case ends altogether. My impression from afar, and again, the case isn't televised, so I'm not watching it. There is no transcript being published daily. I wouldn't have the time to read it if there were. I'm reading press accounts. My impression is that the evidence is sufficient to get to the jury. Now, Dawn asked, what's the felony here? I think the felony, it's a misdemeanor to alter a business record, but I think it's a felony to do so in violation of federal law or in connection with a campaign. And so that would be the claim. And, Mick, let's talk about a hybrid motive,
Hold on. So before we go forward, I think I finally have found some inspiration to give a shit about this case. And it's something like this. So I was, reading through a lot of the coverage of Cohen's testimony, and I learned this, that the name of the attorney on the other side of this hush money, quote unquote, hush money payment. His name is Keith Davidson, and he testified last week. And the substance of his testimony was that Cohen kept delaying the payment for the NDA in connection with the NDA agreement that they had brokered, and that he was threatening to actually sell Stormy Daniels, Stephanie Clifford's story to the Daily Mail if he didn't close on that NDA, which means to me that this is starting to look and feel and smell and sound like a traditional celebrity, whatever you want to call it. High profile individuals get wind that someone who has some story that they think is monetizable in the press, typically the UK outlets, Daily Mail, Guardian, etc., and they give the person against whom the story will likely run the opportunity to buy it away from them. According to Cohen's testimony, Trump had discussed with his own personal advisors basically the ROI of letting this go or throwing some money at it and not having to deal with it. And the number that they had come to was $130,000. And he told Cohen, let's just get it done. It's not worth messing with. So this is starting to look and feel as though this is sort of a more of a fabricated criminal charge, because this sort of transaction is not unique to Trump at all. This is actually a garden variety transaction for celebrities, especially celebrity politicians du jour in this day and age. I was speaking with an attorney yesterday who was giving me his own personal story about a deal that he nearly had brokered for the sale of a story very similar to a sitting member of about a sitting member of Congress, that at the last minute he had to hand a $50,000 check back to the Guardian's representatives who flew down from Manhattan. Right. So this stuff happens all the time. I think that I'm a little irritated with reading about sort of Michael Cohen's being disaffected because he wasn't selected as a member of Trump's cabinet, that he actually defrauded Trump. He admits to defrauding Trump to the tune of at least $50,000 for some IT work that a bill was sent that he was managing the contract for, and he added $50K on top of the bill and never told Trump. And that was part of that installment plan, the $420,000 installment plan that the $130,000 to Stormy Daniels was a part of. That was all baked into there, and Trump had agreed to do like monthly installment payments to make him whole on that. And when he was cross-examined about, whether he was actually doing any legal work with the invoices that he had published, blah, blah, blah. So I think that, the question here, and I think that you gave me this question, Norm, this morning, should Trump bother testifying, or will he testify? I don't know that there is anything to testify about other than advancing the narrative. If there's anything that he can add to the narrative that I just kind of laid forth, this is just like garden variety, like rec league, YMCA pickup ball bullshit, frankly, to me.
Well, it might be, the payment might be
totally
garden variety YMCA pickup ball, but the reporting of it isn't. And that's where I think the rubber meets the road in this case. If there was a false report on a public document, that's actionable. Now, should Trump testify? Let's talk about that. There's a broad misunderstanding in the public at large about a defendant's role at trial and testifying. During voir dire in Connecticut, I'm entering, I think, day 6 or 7 of jury selection in a murder case right now. And I routinely ask people, how will you react? Would you like to hear my client testify? This is a murder case in which the defense is self-defense. And most of them say, yeah, I'd like to hear what he has to say. How will you react if he chooses not to testify? I ask. And they say, well, I assume that would be your advice, or that'd be something you discuss with him. And then I remind them, in a criminal case, many lawyers get to make many of the strategic decisions. But the ultimate decision about whether to testify belongs to a client. There are certain decisions that are the clients and clients alone, right to a jury trial, whether to plead guilty or not, whether to testify. And so typically in a defense case, you sit through the entire prosecution, and then you decide at the very end. Your client is usually the last witness. You turn to him and you say, you've heard the case. Do you want to testify? And a smart lawyer will discuss the pros and cons with it. And then sometimes you'll say to your client, I recommend that you not testify. And the client will say, I want to. We have a saying in my office, you can lead a client to the courthouse, but you can't make them think. Or put another way, our job is to advise the clients as to decide. So, Donald could testify. I think that in terms of wanting a broader stage and his ability to get up and denounce the judge and talk about being a victim, it would seem to me that the imperative to testify in his mind will be overwhelming. And I would be surprised if he didn't testify. So, he doesn't typically show a lot of confidence in his lawyers and has a tendency to ignore them. I can imagine his lawyers saying, don't testify. It's not going to do you any good. Because the question here isn't whether he had sex with Stormy Daniels. He did. The question here isn't whether Stormy Daniels was paid hush money. She was. The question is whether records were altered in such a way as to disguise the payment and make it look like they were a retainer for legal fees when in fact they were hush money. And I think the record is that that's what happened. And that is a crime under New York law, isn't it?
I mean,
maybe not much of one.
Is it right? I mean, is it? And so but here's, I love Janet's question here. So if Cohen paid Daniels out of pocket and then billed Trump, how do you document that invoice? And so this brings,
you don't document as a retainer for legal fees incurred. It's
here's the problem. Here's the problem, right? Michael Cohen is a broke boy. Right. And because here's the real issue. This thing came to a head and became urgent and it got sloppy because Cohen reached out to Weissman. Weissman couldn't help with the payment either. He couldn't make it. And so this became something that was really urgent that shouldn't have otherwise been urgent, but was urgent because Cohen started sweating when Keith Davidson said, hey, I'm going to sell this to the Daily Mail, right? And then Weissman also was convicted in part because he didn't pay taxes on the tuition that the Trump organization paid for his children, right? So the context for this stuff, Norm, is totally ludicrous, but it is a great question. How do you document that invoice, right? Ideally, the money is sitting in trust and then it gets distributed from an IOLTA or a client trust account if you're handling fees, or it runs through a credit card, anything that can be documented. But here's the thing with invoicing. Your invoices as an attorney should read with as much detail as you possibly can. Now, it begs the question of how was Cohen routinely compensated? Was he more on a pre-billed retainer, pre-billed monthly retainer, bi-weekly, quarterly? I don't really know the answers to these questions, but it sounds to me like this situation became something that was larger than the normal scope of his work on behalf of Donald Trump. And he didn't actually do anything different in terms of documentation, handling the transaction, bringing anybody else from the Trump organization in to help him document this in the way that it should have. And because he's probably among the least important or reputable of the entire sea of Trump attorneys, he's the low-hanging fruit, right?
Yeah, no, I hear you. Well, we'll see. My hunch is Mershon lets it go to the jury. I expect a guilty verdict, and then we'll see, what happens on appeal. Hey, how many of, I'm trying to find something to watch on television about current affairs in the news. I'm smarting from some of the criticism of folks here who say I don't read broadly enough. I read a lot, as much as most people that I know, at least most busy people. And so my wife and I watched Michael Smerconish, an old favorite on CNN, hadn't turned him on in years. And I would encourage you to find the episode on Smerconish where he talks about the commencement speech that he didn't get to give at Dickinson College. He was apparently canceled as a result of something he'd written or said earlier, and he gave an abbreviated version of it on CNN. And basically what he said was, go forth and mingle, have interactions with real people, contribute something to your community. I don't know if we can replay parts of it here, Mike, or if it's too long.
I can actually read it. So he has a website, smerconish.com. And so he published basically everything about this. But I think the background is interesting, Norm. Do you recall the reason for them rescinding the offer for him to give the commencement speech?
He said something about something he'd written about 9/11, I thought, or something.
Yeah, so he wrote a book. It was his first book, I believe, and it was written in the wake of 9/11. And I'm searching here. I had the book title, but it's called "Flying Blind: How Political Correctness Continues to Compromise Airline Safety Post 9/11." And it was written in basically the immediate aftermath of 9/11. And apparently there have been students at Dickinson College protesting him coming because they're now distorting the contents of that book. So apparently he had a newspaper column for the Philadelphia Daily News, and he would address the post 9/11 world. Principally, he would talk a lot about airline security, TSA. And I think one thing in particular was regarding, this weird construct of a regulation that developed in the post 9/11 world, where the airlines could not pull for secondary, I guess, examination more than 2 consecutive people of the same perceived race or ethnicity. And so he was calling out the clear absurdity of that. If there were objective reasons for needing to have some sort of secondary questioning or examination of someone coming through TSA security checkpoints, that we shouldn't be, as a country, our national security shouldn't hinge on trying to be nice and not appearing as though we're racist or bigoted, if indeed our protocol or the factors informing the security are valid, right? And so apparently we're more than 20 years removed from his book being published. And so the president of the university and the president of the college and the college rescinded his invitation after pressure from protesters as part of the more, I guess, the broader protest regime that we're seeing right now. And so he responded. And I'll put on the screen what he said he would have, I think, responded with, Norm. And I know the font here is small, so I'll try to make it big and we can just kind of scroll. But he says, here's the abridged version of what he would have said to the class of 2024. And I'll skip down because he does this sort of list of whatever is going on in modern.
Yeah, here's where it got interesting. We can't count on politicians to provide us with necessary leadership. They're a large part of the problem. Like media influencers, perhaps us to the degree we have any, the status quo is well suited to their self-preservation, not ours. This polarization has been building for a while, but was made worse by that which is oddly often labeled connectivity. Instead, technology has disconnected us. Don't get me wrong, like you, I'm dependent upon Google, Uber, Waves, I think he meant to say, an open table, but we're spending too much time staging our lives for digital sharing without experiencing them shoulder to shoulder in real time. And I think he's right about that.
He talks about the what is it? Get out there and mingle. So the charge that he gave to the kids at the end of it was, Dickinson College class of 2024 and all other graduates, go forth and mingle. And so I think that's the sort of the platform that he's on right now, Norm. I'm putting on the screen here Michael Smerconish's the Mingle project, and he is saying something that is reminiscent to me of sort of my childhood in the 90s. Right before there was this sort of interconnectedness and the gravity around our devices and our compulsion to be in them. I actually buy his proposition that that sort of the interconnectedness and online nature of discourse has actually fractured us and prevented us from realizing how much as a society we have in common. He says in his post there, what he published, that America has not had any real tectonic shifts in its cultural values in more than 50 years. He actually says that we as Americans on average agree on all of the same principal things that we have historically, at least in the modern era, but we don't believe that because of the way that our discourse has been fractured, and it has evolved to put us more in our homes and not out together in a more social climate. So his charge with the Mingle project is for people to go and be in their communities, get involved with youth leagues, get involved with the Big Brothers project, get involved with your local politics and institutions that way. And and actually learn more about how to have conversations with your neighbors.
So is the Mingle has he written something about this, or is this just a banner he uses on his show?
No, this is a 3-minute 3-minute video here, and I think that what this ultimately is sort of a project that he's working on developing, and I think it's a segment that he's doing as part of his daily show on XM radio, because he is syndicated on XM radio every day. And so this is something that he's putting out there into the world. I think is sort of a cultural charge, which I can see the overlap, Norm. I can see why you were drawn to what you saw.
Well, we've talked about it here ourselves. We've talked about the handshake economy, and I've talked about my great sense of embarrassment. From time to time, I'll utter Islamophobic comments and mean them when I say them. I don't see people migrating to Islamic countries for a better way of life, but I see Islamic people fleeing a failed social experiment in their communities and wanting to repeat them here. And it's ugly when it comes out of my mouth. I've been criticized for it in general, but I would say that I am proven to be a hypocrite every time I meet a Muslim cab driver, as I used to in my travels around the country. I would routinely fall in love with the person whose story I heard about, who came here for a better way of life, who misses his own family. And I have found the power of mingling to be profound. Now that the courts are resuming really active schedules again, as COVID recedes into the background, I'm seeing lawyers and judges that I haven't seen in a long time, and we're talking about life, and we're talking about our cases, and we're talking about how things are going. And there's a different quality to that tactile presentation of self in the real world. I think that Smerconish is onto something. I'm not sure how to mobilize that into meaningful social change, but maybe that's asking too big a question. Maybe not every question has to be, what's the fulcrum point that moves the world, but rather what's the hand that shakes the neighbor's hand and that makes life marginally better. So I commend Smerconish to people. I didn't know about the Mingle project. Take a look at it. Take a look at what he has to say. And get out there and talk to people today. Engage in a small act of kindness. Listen to your neighbor.
I love the message. I love the message that he's giving to young people of that age, right? And I think, regrettably, I think it's probably coming on the back of significant loan burdens as they come out. So, I know that the criticism of the message of go forth and mingle is sort of like, hey, I gotta get a paycheck, right? But I think that a younger demo would be more ripe for this sort of message. I think juniors and seniors in high school should be the ones that this message really reaches. And I think that's something I'm realizing that I'm fairly passionate about, because I remember being a 16, 17-year-old and having some sort of distant connection to something that I thought I might want to be, but not really having many older people around that were in my, I played a lot. I was a jock, right? So the guys that, the older guys that were involved in my life were, teaching me powerlifting, right? The mechanics of powerlifting, and then, making me bang my head into somebody else just a little bit harder and with a little bit more efficiency. And no disrespect to those guys. I love them all. However, there wasn't a whole lot there that I was asking them about, how did you get to become a high school football coach, and, what was your path, right? There wasn't a whole lot of interest there from my perspective, but I do think that there are people in our day-to-day lives that appear to, because he's talking here about social fitness, right? The key to a good life, and what researchers have found prolongs life and is the best marker of a good life. And that is what he calls social fitness. That is having good social connections by the time one is 50 years old is more determinative of long-term physical and mental health. And what that means is that people feel like they are impactful and they're influential in their own lives, and that they decide to be where they are, right? So as a young person, understanding that, people didn't drop to a high school athletic, coaching staff because they didn't have anything else to do. They wanted to be there, right? And understanding that a little bit more, and forging a connection in your community, and having a little more reverence and respect for the people that actually want to be there, whether you perceive them to be a Kardashian or not, etc. I think is really important and something that young people have lost connection with. So I'll get off the soapbox. I do want to talk about the $6 billion legal bill that Elon Musk is now facing down.
Yeah, what's up with that? So Elon Musk gets challenged. You know, his compensation package, which I think was 56 billion or something like that, gets challenged and held to be too much. And so now the shareholder activists who challenged his salary want $6 billion in legal fees. I mean, what's up with that?
So I remember this story from earlier in the year, and
I want $6 billion in legal fees. You know,
yeah, who doesn't? But it comes. So here's the math. Did you catch what they admitted to that being on an hourly basis for the hours they put in? $288,800 per hour is what it comes down to. A $6 billion legal fee. So as you said, shareholder activists challenged the compensation package that Tesla negotiated with Elon Musk back in 2018, which said that he would get a discounted purchase price of Tesla stock if he reached certain financial milestones. It came time to pay up because the man honored his side of the obligation. And the shareholder activists within Tesla decided that they were going to sue and render that compensation package as unreasonable or otherwise, and against the company's interests. So the package would have, I think, netted him somewhere close to $56 billion. There was a lockup period on the stock that he would buy, so he couldn't actually just buy at a discount and then turn around and sell it really quickly. I think he would have had to have had it for at least 5 years. A Delaware judge decided that I believe it's a she, agreed with the plaintiffs in this. And so she voided that compensation package. And then to add insult to injury, in March, the attorneys for the shareholder activists, I believe, won their because they won their suit. They added fees and costs into their relief demand, and then they gave the judge a calculation of $6 billion when it came down to what she would be faced with in determining whether reasonable or not for attorney's fees.
Has she ruled on that yet?
To my knowledge, I wasn't able to find anything about whether they've this morning whether they've actually resolved that issue. At the time, Elon came out on X, of course, and called the move for that to be criminal. And specifically, he said that it's interesting that they would charge $6 billion in legal fees after the nature of the case was such that his compensation package was not in the best interest of Tesla, but the Tesla shareholders would be the one that were affected by the $6 billion legal fees, and none of that money was going back into the company. Right.
I don't know this statistic, but I suspect that most lawyers in the United States make less than $288,000 a year, much less make in an hour. And so I think Elon's point is well taken. The judge should trim those back. I mean, I remember once in New York City talking to some SEC investigators and FBI investigators about legal fees in the city. And their view was, $1,400-1,500 an hour. That was the norm, for a good lawyer in Manhattan. And that struck me as a lot of money then. Now, even adjusted for inflation, that never became $288,000, an hour. That's just extraordinary.
So Alyssa asks whether this is the most expensive lawsuit in history, and it appears that it has the potential to be. So this is coming from Reuters. Reuters is saying that the largest fee on record was $688 million back in 2008 on behalf of the plaintiffs that sued Enron. And were awarded a $7.2 billion settlement. So recall the quote unquote value of this lawsuit were somewhere close to $56 billion. But that's not real money because it nullifies the compensation that would have been owed to Elon. In other words, I think that if the share price was, close to $200 per share at the time, his discounted rate would have brought it close to like $25 per share buy. And so they extrapolated that to his full optionality with respect to that and called it a $56 billion compensation package, which, by the way, their argument hinged, Norm, on the fact that they said that the board at the time was captive to Elon, and such that they couldn't have made a good deal for the company. So I think that's interesting. You know, we have a situation here where we have a valid and legally binding contract, and then we ultimately, hindsight being what it is, a judge agrees with the plaintiffs in this case, and they say that the board did not make a decision that was in the best interest of the company. But I'm sitting here, I guess, as an attorney, thinking, how is it that we're going to rescind a valid and legally binding contract just because the guy that negotiated did what he said he was going to do?
Yeah, no, I get it. It doesn't make any sense to me. Well, I don't know. These are big dollars, a different world. I think, as F. Scott Fitzgerald once put it, the rich live different lives than the rest of us. I'm looking at the comments here. Somebody says, Norm, at least watch one of Viva's Sunday night law school thing. I didn't even know he had it, so maybe I will. Thank you, Janet, for the heads up. Dawn has decided that she's now a member of the younger generation. She's a member of your generation, Mike. She's
welcome.
Concluded that I'm a superannuated fossil.
Forgive Dawn. She knows not what she does.
Yeah. Well, anyhow, folks, here we have it. That's today.
Go ahead.
No.
Let's see. Robert Barnes does a lot of ranting these days, getting boring. And then Daisy Girl says, Mayor Rudy got fired from WABC Radio Friday for a breach of contract he didn't know existed. Speaking on 2020 election, Steve Bannon flew out and joined them on a show. So I haven't read anything about that. I'll have to kind of go back.
I'm just not into the ideological internet or the ideological social media thing. I saw this week that Trennis Evans from Condemned USA filed a lawsuit against Judge Merchan, presumably for election interference. And I just thought, why? There's just so much silliness going out there in litigation world right now. There are real issues in the world to resolve, and suing Juan Merchan and trying to penetrate judicial immunity on that grounds seems silly. He is immune. I am in favor of Joe's suit against Merchan for the gag order, because I think that that fundamentally changes our relationship to information. But I don't know.
Neurotic. This is a great comment. So Neurotic says it has nothing to do with being rich, Norm. It has to do with punishing Elon for stepping out of line. If you look into this judge, I'm sure there's a pattern. So I think the subtext there, if I'm translating properly, is that Elon's excesses as of late with respect to getting on stage and saying what he said in the New York Times forum. And then also challenging, I think more mainstream narratives surrounding the election, platforming those that the establishment media, the trust-funded media, the bureaucratic middle management media had ousted as being, undesirable, has yielded a groundswell of opposition within his companies, and shareholder activism is particularly dangerous stuff. So I think, Neurotic, point well taken there. I also think that it's a convenient judgment for the judge to come to, because most people can't fathom that any CEO is worth $56 billion in compensation. And so the normies among the population would see that and sort of shrug their shoulders and say, oh, well, it's not like the richest man in the world needed another, 20% added to his net worth. Right.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
So anyway, good. I think this is a good start to the week. Thank you everybody for the patience on a Monday. I think we will be tentatively here Thursday, Friday, but it's likely that Norm, we may have to postpone those as well. We've got jury selection in a federal case here Thursday, and then trial Friday. It's going to be short. It's a mini trial handed down from the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals out of Richmond, Virginia. We're here in the Middle District Court in North Carolina, here in Greensboro, on a fairly interesting case, and has to do with the elements of a contract. Surprise, surprise. So I'll let you know and keep everybody informed on the likelihood of Thursday, Friday, just depending on scheduling.
All right, sounds good. AMF Yo-Yo, and find us somewhere, contribute, spread the word. We're here. We're looking for your support.
Yeah, that's right. We're here, most days, 8 a.m. Eastern time, Monday through Friday on YouTube, on Rumble, and on X. Please follow Law Pod Daily and subscribe if you haven't already. If you haven't liked this video by now, I just assume that you don't like us. So I will beg for you to just to hit the thumbs up, just, out of just like pay your little tax here. It's a thumb tax.
Yeah. All right.
Oh, that's hilarious. A thumb tax. Anyway, Norm, I will talk to you tomorrow. I got to get to work, guys.
Ciao. See you tomorrow.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.